What's up, everybody? Hope you're having an awesome Sunday so far. So as you can tell from the title of the video, as well as the lovely image you see on your screen here, we have got a ban announcement tomorrow. Ban and restricted announcement. Now, we don't have any sort of confirmation on if anything's getting banned, what could be banned, nothing of the sort. So I thought we would have a little fun and make some predictions, talk about the things that I think need to be adjusted specifically in the modern format. If you're looking for opinions on like Pioneer and Legacy, other formats like that, I have not played enough gameplay of those to have a truly informed decision. But modern, I feel like, is an area that I do have a good bit of gameplay in. Do keep up with results fairly regularly, so hopefully I can give some reasoning here, give some insight as to my thoughts. And who knows, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Either way, as always, I hope you let me know in the comments what you are thinking. Before we hop into the video, as always, down in the description below, we'll have a link to the Twitter. So if you want to catch a live stream of Death Shadow or something else, Twitter is the first place it gets updated with notifications that we're going live. We'll have a link to the Twitch, so you can come check out one of those live streams, and a link to the Discord, so you can come talk about anything from Death Shadow to other modern decks, other formats, or just complain that my tier lists and my ban list predictions are terrible. And yeah, so we'll go from there. Either way, let's go ahead and get rolling. So I got 9 cards for you, and I got them breaking down into 3 categories, and we'll go over them individually. The first category is cards that I think are at the top of the ban watch list. These are the cards that I think will either be banned, maybe not this ban announcement, maybe in the near future. And I'll give an explanation because at least one of them is very off the beaten path. The second is decks or cards that I believe should be banned. And this is more from a balancing perspective than it is from necessarily a promotes bad gameplay perspective. And then the third is 3 cards that I think should be looked at to be unbanned. And obviously that's always got some hot takes, but I think these are 3 actually reasonable cards, and I will give my reasonings for them when we get to them. So first off, we've got cards that are likely to get banned. These are the 3 cards that I think are at the top of the list and more than likely need to go sooner rather than later. First off, Nadu Winged Wisdom. Everybody knows this card. You've seen it a million times. You've probably played against it a million times. You've probably sat there and either F6'd or made your opponent click it out a million times. Either way, I think that Nadu Winged Wisdom, even though it's a fairly new addition to the format, just coming out in Modern Horizons 3, has been a detriment not only to gameplay in person, but coverage of gameplay. It's been a big question mark in the format since the Pro Tour Modern Horizons 3, when nobody knew if this card was going to get an emergency ban, if they were going to stick it out. They said they were going to wait until the ban announcement window, which is coming up tomorrow. But this has been the thing that's thrown everything up in the air. From a power level perspective, I don't necessarily think that Nadu is a deck that can't be hated out to a certain degree. The problem is the deck itself has got so many ways to fight against that hate that there is a good number of games that even if you've got the surgical extraction on Nadu, you lose to the Springheart Nantuko, making an army of tokens, and the Bristly Bill pumping it up. Even if you've got the counter spells and the removal spells for the Nadus, there's a chance that you lose to the Shifting Woodland, copying Nadu from the yard and allowing your opponent to go off. Even if you've got the artifact hate for the Shuko, the Stony Silence, the anything of the sort, then you still run the risk of your opponent Court of Calling for a Riders and being able to combo off with that, or even getting a Sylvan Safekeeper, something to that effect. There's just so many avenues for the deck to get around the things that should be doing the job of policing it. And for that reason, as well as the time commitment, we're seeing more and more tournaments with Nadu turns going to time. It becomes a dexterity issue to get through with the deck in the allotted time period for rounds and events like RCQs, big invitationals. You have to physically move these tokens along your conveyor belt at a specific rate. And if you play the optimal version of the deck or the version that showed up at the Pro Tour without the Thassa's Oracle, you run into these issues twofold. Because as soon as you start having to loop your library back in with, or your graveyard back in with Endurance, now time is gone. Now you're getting to matches that are decided in the first game because you can't get to a second, and you can't really push your opponent for a time violation because during this whole process they are presenting a sometimes deterministic, sometimes non-deterministic loop, and as long as they're progressing, tough luck. So for a lot of those reasons, as well as being like the most or the highest win percentage in the format, I do think Nadu Winged Wisdom probably needs to go ahead and take the bird shot of the ban. Just clip its wings, get it out of the format, move on to the next one. So next up on the list, another card that I think is probably a pretty popular choice for going on the ban list, and that is of course the One Ring from our favorite Lord of the Rings set, Direct to Modern. So the One Ring, the 4-mana indestructible artifact that allows you to blank your opponent's next turn, allows you to give yourself protection, draw some cards. The biggest argument I think you can give to the One Ring is the fact that it's the most played card in Modern by a mile. So I did look it up before this. The One Ring is averaging 3.2 copies in 48% of decks. To put that in comparison, the second most popular card, the second most played card in Modern is Sun Cleanser at 1.8 copies in about every 30 to 35% of decks. That is a huge, huge jump from number 1 to number 2. And obviously, the Ring has this colorless cost requirement, or this generic cost requirement, that allows it to be slotted into every deck under the sun. We've seen Nadu with the One Ring, Tron, Mono Black. We've seen Jeskai Control. We've seen Dimir Control. We've seen Twiddle Storm with the One Ring. We've seen every deck under the sun with the One Ring. And you'll hear this argument a lot of the times of, hey, this deck is only playable because of the One Ring. And I don't think that's an argument we should be leaning into, because it kind of prevents us from taking action against the things in the format that could allow a more balanced experience and give more decks an opportunity to naturally become present. Whereas the One Ring right now is, Scape Shift is playable because you have the One Ring. And at the end of the day, if you've got 4 copies of the One Ring, the rest of your game plan a lot of the times doesn't matter that much. You're kind of winning with whatever stuff you can jam together in a modern legal deck. So I don't think that's necessarily a positive for a lot of these lower tier decks or a lot of these kind of obscure decks that aren't seeing as much play. I think it's more of a crutch that the entire format is kind of leaning on, because the best way to combat your opponent's One Ring is you having a One Ring and keeping up with cards that way. So for a lot of those reasons, for the fact that it's the most played card in the format by a mile, the requirements to play it are non-existent, and it does this job of prolonging games or creating swings that I don't necessarily think are healthy for the format. For those reasons, I am saying adios to the One Ring, casting it off into the fires of Mount Doom, and letting Gollum go down with it. So the third card on my likely to ban list, I really have to preface this one by saying I don't think this is anywhere near the tier of the first two. I don't think this third one should be touched until the first two are taken care of, until Nadu and the One Ring are taken care of. But what I don't want to create is a next man up cycle where we're saying, hey, we banned one, we banned two, now three just becomes the de facto thing to do. I don't think that's a healthy way of approaching bannings. So if it were up to me, I would attack this third card as well, because I do think that Boros and Mardu Energy are two of the decks that not only are extraordinarily popular, but have the most to gain if cards like the One Ring and Nadu are no longer in the format. So the third card I'm throwing on my needs to be banned list is Guide of Souls. So we'll talk about this one a little bit. I know I'm going to get absolutely torn apart in the comments. Like, why Guide of Souls? Guide of Souls is so fair. Guide of Souls is so good. It's because I think Guide of Souls is the card that really works to push energy over the top. So Guide of Souls allows play patterns like turn 1 Guide into turn 2 Amped Raptor or Johnny, with something like an Aether Hub that allows you to go ahead and get counters on your Guide of Souls. So go ahead and start attacking with a 3/4 flyer as soon as turn 2 and fairly consistently. It allows you to start building up extra energy so that cards like Static Prison become 1 mana, exile non-land permanent, never get it or never give it back because you just have this supply of energy forming. It's a life gain trigger for your Ocelot Prides. So as soon as you play your Ocelot Pride on turn 2, you know you're going to get to make a cat at the end of the turn. It creates a series of patterns where your opponent can no longer interact on the ground because your Guide of Souls is able to start jumping your Ocelot Prides, your Raptors, your other Guide of Souls, whatever, into the air, making it more difficult to interact with the deck from a blocking standpoint. It's just a lot of value packed into a 1 mana card. It's completely pushed like Soul Sisters out of the format. Like, why play Soul Sisters when I can play a Soul Sisters that has the chance of just making my things giant flying attackers? When you get Guide of Souls working in multiples with a lot of these 2-for-1 cards, so Ocelot Prides and Johnnies, things like that, you run the risk of like just an extraordinarily fast clock that a lot of decks in Modern don't have the capability of catching up with. I also don't necessarily want to hit some of the value 2-for-1 cards out of the deck. So like Amped Raptor, I think, is a really cool card. But dial back the amount that Amped Raptor can do on turn 2. I think that a Johnny is a cool card. But when you a Johnny, like I said, with an Aether Hub after a Guide of Souls, now all of a sudden you have to deal with this a Johnny, or you threaten it flipping, but you have to deal with this Guide of Souls because it's just going to kill you. You can't kill the guide on turn 1 because then the Ajani resolves and you have to have more stuff. It's just a card that I believe snowballs better than anything else in the Boros and Mardu energy decks. And it's also a card that I don't think is any less than a 4 of in any of those builds. So it is a very integral part, but I don't think it's a card that necessarily makes it so that you're unable to play that archetype. I just think it knocks back the consistency a reasonable enough amount. Like maybe you can replace it with Ragavan or another 1-drop that has been shown to be less impactful, but I think Guide of Souls for a 1-drop is just doing too much for this particular archetype. And so if you ban Nadu and you ban the One Ring, I would like to see Guide of Souls go in that same breath, just so, like I said, we don't have that next man up scenario. So that's my 3 cards that I think should be on the chopping block. And I don't necessarily think it's all or none. I think you can ban Nadu, ban the One Ring, and watch Guide of Souls, but I think you have to at least watch something out of the energy deck. But thankfully, we might have another one on the list. So the second tier of cards, the cards I think should be banned for balancing purposes. These are cards, 3 cards that I do not believe by any stretch of the imagination are powerful enough to warrant a ban right this second. But they are cards that similar cards have been banned, and these promote the same play patterns, the same game patterns, and we'll talk about what those are. So first up on this list, Grief. I don't think Grief is a card that is surprising too many people being on here. I think that it is an extremely valuable enabler or protection for unfair decks, for things like Necro Dominance, Living End, Goryo's Vengeance, things like that. But it's a card that reminds me a lot of it reminds me a lot of Birthing Pod, where Birthing Pod got banned with the argument of the more like we print creatures with ETB abilities, the better Birthing Pod gets. Grief, in that same idea, the better the things are that if you resolve, it wins you the game, the better Grief gets, because it's the free Thoughtseize. It is the free check to make sure the coast is clear and then just resolve my Haymaker immediately after. So the better those Haymakers are, the better Grief becomes. And for that reason, I think that Grief's time should be fairly limited. It's not a card I think is in need of an immediate ban, but we've seen decks like Mono Black, again, Goryo's Vengeance, Living End, that have really utilized Grief to great success, being able to protect the turn that they want to go off, as well as disrupt their opponent's game plan for little to no investment early on. So I would like to see Grief at least get a big look, if not an actual ban. But if the first 3 get hit, the Nadu, the One Ring, Guide of Souls, then I think Grief starts getting up on that list of, hey, next man up. Maybe we just want to axe it to help kind of level out the playing field. If these other decks aren't getting to do something unfair, then the unfair decks shouldn't get to do something unfair. Next up, Orcish Bowmasters, which I hate because I like Orcish Bowmasters. I play Orcish Bowmasters. But if the One Ring doesn't exist in the format, I would like to see Orcish Bowmasters go. I don't think that this is a card that is necessarily healthy or needs to be around. I think it's a check to Necro Dominance and the One Ring, but I just don't feel like it's a card that should be an auto include because those decks exist in the format. So if those decks don't exist in the format, I would rather just Bowmaster get out. I do think there are a decent number of cool X1 creatures that Bowmaster keeps in check, like Ragavan, like Esper Sentinel, decks like Elves, Affinity that have a really tough time with Bowmaster. You don't think of Affinity, but when your Thought Monitor, Thought Cast get cast, and Bowmaster just gets to have a field day pinging dudes off, it's a pretty big deal. So I think that Bowmaster being out of the format would allow a few more of those cheap creature decks to have a chance. I wouldn't necessarily say they'll be good, but I would rather them have a chance than just be pushed out of the format altogether. So Bowmasters, again, if the One Ring's gone, just take out the Bowmasters too. I understand that the One Ring and Orcish Bowmasters especially are two very big price point cards. A lot of people invested a lot of money into having access to them. But personally, I don't take that into account when I come up with a card that I believe needs to be removed from the format. So if your argument for like Bowmaster is, oh, I spent a bunch, well, tough luck. I don't know what to tell you on that one outside of get wrecked, I guess. Not really. Don't actually think I'm getting wrecked. So finally, third card that I think should be looked at, and this one has such obvious comparisons to something that's already on the ban list, and it really goes along with that next man up mentality, as well as takes away from format diversity. And that card is Flage Titan of Fire's Fury. So if you can't figure it out, the obvious comparison is Uro. I do believe Uro is better. I think drawing cards, playing extra lands is better than the damage. But we're seeing more Flage decks with cards like Arena of Glory be able to really close the game out of nowhere. I think that the Lightning Helix effect has made decks like Burn completely unplayable. We've seen a lot of cheap creature decks that have just left entirely because they cannot fight a Flage. We've seen prowess builds get knocked down into oblivion because as soon as that first creature gets flaged, it's probably just game over. And then you double up on that with ideas of, oh, I'll surgical the Flages, and that's just an awful strategy. If your plan is to let them kill your dude, gain life, and then pay more life to surgical Flage, and then just like leave the rest of the cards in their deck. So Flage, I think, is a card that's a little too versatile for current Modern. If we had some better answers to it, then maybe I'd be a little on board. Again, I do put it in that list below the DEFCON 4 bans, the Nadu One Ring, then the Guide of Souls, and then Flage. I don't want to just like go destroy Mardu and Boros energy, or Jeskai energy, Jeskai control. But Flage is a card that I do think is very much stifling deck diversity in Modern. And if you want to truly bring back a bit of a balanced format, then I think it's a card that is going to have to meet its maker at some point before you're able to get that rolling. So that's my 3. Should be banned for the sake of evening out the format. We hit the 3 that are likely, or I would think would be likely to get banned. And now we've got the fun part. We've got the unbans. We got the things people always want to hear about. I will start this section off by saying this is a very, very conservative list. I am only looking at cards that I think can actually safely be unbanned and not cards that I just want to see if they'd be okay. Like the cards everybody jumps to, Splinter Twin. Everybody wants Splinter Twin. Everybody argues Splinter Twin would be fine nowadays. There's so much interaction. Personally, I don't think that's the case. I think Splinter Twin with cards like Force and Negation sounds like an absolute nightmare that people just are not ready for. I wish it could do a little bit better right now, or the format could do a little bit better against Splinter Twin, but I just don't think it's a deck that we need in the format or people actively want. I shouldn't say people actively want. There's plenty of insane people out there that want Splinter Twin. I don't think it's a deck that the format as a whole actively wants. If you're already worrying about stifling deck diversity, then Splinter Twin just like personifies that to the next level. Like, oh, if you don't kill me by turn 4, or you aren't playing a hard control mid-range deck, then you run the risk of just being out of it. So no Splinter Twin on this list. What we do have, however, probably one of my favorite ones on the ban list, at least at the current moment, Hypergenesis. I think Hypergenesis is completely fine. And the reason for that is Simeon's Spirit Guide is no longer in the format. Violent Outburst is no longer in the format. We've got like Living End is the best Cascade deck. We've got Rhinos, but Hypergenesis runs into the fact that if you are able to interact with the hand, you can make the deck worse, because it's not like Rhinos or Living End where you cascade into the thing and you get to just go off. Hypergenesis requires you to have the stuff in hand when the Hypergenesis resolves. So it gets more into an argument of can you find the stuff? Are you keeping the stuff in hand? You can't cycle to find your cascade spells. You have to have this naturally drawn balance. There's more ways of dealing with these cascade spells than there were before. So I think Hypergenesis would be a card that we can afford to take off the ban list. Give Cascade decks a little bit of a chance here and there, because Lord knows at the moment they need it. But I'd love to put in like a Undercity Sewers off of Hypergenesis and just be like, oh, you got me. You got an Emrakul. It would also give us another reason to sideboard Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Like right now, we're sideboarding Emrakul occasionally for decks like Mill. Let's play Emrakul for Hypergenesis. Let me put in an Emrakul off of their stuff and then untap and attack with a big Annihilator 15/15 flyer. I feel like that's well deserved at this point. So Hypergenesis, I think, is on the list of cards that I would feel safe unbanning. I don't think has any big impact on the format. The second one, Ponder. This one's probably a little bit more on the maybe too good train of thought. In Legacy, a lot of the times you have this Ponder versus Preordain argument, like which is better. Preordain's a little bit better for digging for combo pieces. Ponder's a little bit better of like a value cantrip. I think Ponder is a perfectly reasonable card to unban. When Ponder was banned, you were looking at cryptic command decks and unfair decks like crazy that were really taking advantage. Now we've got Preordain unbanned that is doing next to nothing in the format. We've got some Psychic Frog decks running it, and that's about it. Like the premier control deck in the format, Jeskai Control, isn't even running Preordain. They're running Tune the Narrative. Tune the Narrative. Think about that. Not playing the unbanned cantrip, playing the 1 mana make 2 energy draw a card. So I would like to see Ponder Maybe it gives a little bit more to a lot of the aggressive tempo style decks, the Murktide decks. Potentially some of the control decks play it, but probably not. Give some combo decks a few more elements to help out, which they'll need if cards like Grief and the One Ring get banned. So Ponder, I think, is like a really cool cantrip I would like to see in the format, or at least try it out. If Preordained had had more of an impact, if it was like this auto 4 of in every blue deck, I wouldn't even consider Ponder. But because Preordained has clearly, very clearly, been power crept to a reasonable level in Modern, if not under a reasonable level, then I think Ponder might be the kind of card we need to get things back into an even balance. And then, finally, the third card on the Unban list. And this one I know is going to get some moans and groans. So I am super excited to read the comments on it. But the card is... Mental Misstep. No, it's Deathrite Shaman. Don't worry. I'd make all my commentary about Mental Misstep. I still personally think the card would be reasonable, but no, I'm talking about Deathrite Shaman. Man, talk about a card that people are extraordinarily polarized on. So first, I want to bring up the fact that you have to go 20 cards deep, or 20 decks deep in the Goldfish metagame before you find a black-green X mid-range deck. And I'm not talking about like Grief, Necro Dominance, the One Ring, that kind of mid-range. I'm talking about like a true value-oriented mid-range deck, and it's Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth, 20 cards or 20 decks deep. So decks like Jund mid-range, Jund Saga, Abzan mid-range, The Rock, just completely pushed out of the format. Deathrite Shaman, I think, would give a fantastic, not only shot in the butt to those decks to maybe help them get up a little bit more, but would be a great reinvigorator for players in the format to potentially come back, try to brew, try to get involved, try to play with a card that's really exciting, really interesting. Obviously, having this card that gives some sort of main deck hate to things like Flage is really nice. Little main deck life gain against the Boros energy decks. Little main deck life loss against some of the control decks. I think it offers a lot of potential. You do run the risk of decks that could play Deathrite deciding to play it. It is a very good card. But we also live in a format where cards like Galvanic Discharge and Fatal Push and Unholy Heat are the standard. Solitude, Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding, cards that didn't exist when Deathrite Shaman initially got the axe. And I don't see a world where Deathrite Shaman is more impactful, at least to the modern format, than other one-drops like Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride and Ragavan. And I'd like to see what that looked like. What kind of decks Deathrite Shaman could potentially find a home in. Is it able to give some of those mid-range, black-based mid-range decks some more tools to get back into a metagame share? I don't know. maybe y'all have some stronger opinions on it. Maybe y'all have some thoughts. Maybe you've tried out no ban list with Deathrite Shaman. But obviously, I'm not suggesting unbanning things like Ayavugan that would clearly outshine our favorite little elf shaman here. But I do think it's a card that would have some interesting possibilities. Main deck hate for opposing Murktides for the graveyard. Main deck hate for some opposing spell decks, Flage, all that stuff. I'd like to see it tried. So that is my list of cards. So just to recap, the 3 I would like to see banned: Nadu, One Ring, Guide of Souls, in that order. The 3 I'd like to see looked at for balance considerations: Flage, Titan of Fire's Fury, Grief, and Orcish Bowmasters. And then the 3 that I think would be safe to unban: Hypergenesis, Ponder, and Deathrite Shaman. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like. Come check out some of the other stuff we have up. As always, I hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.